Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. Frank Llosa is the founder and CEO of KetoneAid, a company that I think might be the biggest game changer for not only athletes, but for anyone who wants to perform at their best. Frank is a brilliant serial entrepreneur who has an incredible track record of success in a number of different fields, starting from real estate to highly technical photography for the National Geographic, to one of the first cloud-based storage systems available to the public, not to mention a former elite Division I track athlete. I've asked Frank to come on the show today to discuss a Ketone Ester product that I believe is going to become a daily drink for anyone wanting to perform at their best. Frank, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I'm excited to hear that you liked it. I wasn't quite sure because I just sent it to you a couple of days ago.
Yeah, look, absolute game changer. And I mean, I guess I'll start there. Look, Frank, I'm not a big believer of supplements. I do think that there are certain supplements out there that most people need, but very few. And one of them would be like, say, vitamin D, and because especially where I live, a lot of people are deficient in it, and it makes a huge difference. Actually, it's not even a vitamin, but so that, for example, is one that I would sort of recommend, and people do notice a difference if they take it for a long time. But other than that, I'm a big believer of trying to get everything from your whole foods, and then obviously, if you can't, supplementing.
Well, the good news is this is not a supplement. It's actually technically a food.
And that's what I learned when
naturally fermented food. Wikipedia is wrong. It's not synthetic. It's the opposite. The ketone salts, the other products that are on the market tend to be almost all of them synthetic. This is naturally derived through a fermentation process like a beer.
So that was the first thing that I guess impressed me. So I reached out to you. I didn't think I was going to have time to try it before I spoke to you, but and then I was very confused because my belief of this supplement, of this food, was that it was a something to help athletes perform at their best. And I'm correct, I think, in saying that. But what I guess my I envisaged, and even after reading a fair bit of information, was that I would get a lot of energy, and I feel like I can sort of endure for longer, and perhaps even perform better. And then you mentioned to me that I should have it before I go to sleep, and I was quite
how crazy is that?
Quite confused
before bed,
and I was very reluctant to do so because sleep's very important to me, and I didn't want to sort of jeopardize a night's sleep, being awake all night. I felt like it was going to be something like caffeine. Anyway, I trusted your judgment, and just your instructions were immediately before bed, take, I think it was 5 mils, you said. And so I'm a fairly lightweight and also pretty sensitive to different things. I would
have told you 3. If I knew that, I would have dropped to 3.
But that's okay, because you'd mentioned that in your blurb on the website. So because I knew that about myself, and I normally take kids' doses of any medicine, I actually took 3.
Great, perfect.
And I was blown away. I felt great when I woke up, but I'm also a bit of a believer that the placebo effect as well. So I actually luckily wear the Aura ring.
Oh yeah, you can add to our list of screenshots. Yep,
I will. And so I track my sleep, and I've actually been wondering how I can improve my deep sleep, because I for whatever reason I fall asleep really, really well, but I don't seem to get really great deep sleep. Now, in saying that, according to Aura, most adults get about 1 to 1.5 a night, and I'm sort of probably more at that lower end. I normally get about 1. Mm-hmm. And I think my average is just potentially just over 1. Anyway, I beat that average by about 40 minutes last night.
That's exactly what I think I put in the email. You'll get 30 minutes more deep sleep, and I was being conservative.
Yeah, I mean, and then afterwards, this morning, I actually read different studies where people were getting 60 plus. So I'm pretty competitive. So I was like, oh, that's a shame I only got, but I was very, very impressed that I got that. And I looked back.
And that was only $1.50's worth. So people think of the Ketone Ester, they think of a $50 drink. What you took was $1.50, $1.50 worth.
Wow. So I was quite blown away by that, to be honest. And then I had a bit of a workout this morning, and just before I went, I decided I'd just try another small dose, just to see if I felt any different. And
how much? 5 mLs?
Yeah, I took about 4.
Okay.
I'm still a bit conservative when it comes to all this sort of stuff, and so I took 4, and the difference that I noticed was I actually had more strength, but not only that, I felt more clarity in terms of I didn't have that fatigue, exhaustion that you sometimes get when you're sort of doing weights and that sort of thing. This was more gymnastic style training, so it sort of takes a lot out of you. It's your whole body working.
How was your flexibility? Was your flexibility coincidentally better?
To be honest, I don't think it could get much better. It's pretty good. And today actually we didn't even work on flexibility. It was more just rings work. So It was full body rings, so like, muscle ups and handstands on rings and things like that. But I just did not get fatigued, and I felt like I just wanted to keep going.
Yeah, so not everyone notices a profound effect like you do. It takes a few times to dial in the right amount for one reason. And another reason is it'll lower your lactic acid increase significantly. So if you're running, and you won't necessarily, some people won't feel any different, but then if you have less lactic acid, you then start running a little bit faster until you get that lactic acid that you're used to. And then you think, oh, well, it was just a great, normal, regular day. And then they look at their watch, and that is when they see, the huge, or, they see a difference after the fact when they look at their numbers, even though they didn't necessarily feel it. But for you, you felt a lot. It was doing the recovery benefit. So in between sessions, it was recovering you in a way that it made you feel like you were on your first set when it was really your second and third set. And that's what it does. And we've had one person said, you know what, I didn't lift more, and I didn't lift more weight, and I did not lift more reps. And then we were talking more, and then 20 minutes later it came out, oh, but I did get out of the gym in 40 minutes instead of 90 minutes. Do you think that had something to do with the ester, or some crazy amount? And he'd forgotten that he didn't have a lifting partner, so he did the sessions, back to back faster than he would normally do. But his numbers were the same, but he got through the workout in half the time.
Funny. Yeah, it's funny how people sort of don't see that. But so I really did notice a difference, and I albeit it was a small amount, but then I also read that actually sometimes smaller amounts work more effectively.
The way it works is if you take too much, it can lower your blood sugar too much, and you need glucose in your system, whether you're keto or non-keto. For working out, for that power, you need some glucose in your system. So you don't want to drive it down too much. So either, we call it now microdosing. What you took 4 mLs is less than 1/15 of a bottle. So just a tiny, tiny amount. Some people will actually pour it in their water bottle and get a slow release of it for the next hour. But how did you feel at the end of the workout, heading into your work day, as far as mentally, where you might previously have been zonked?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like I've got a lot more clarity. I actually feel like there's one other sort of food supplement that I do like as well, and that's chaga.
Okay.
And I find I get a lot of, chaga mushrooms. I get a lot of clarity from that, but I didn't take that today, and I didn't feel like I needed to take it either.
Yeah, and people say that it's different than caffeine. They expect a jittery energy, but it's a calm ninja type, calm energy, which people say is just strange and just unexpected.
Absolutely. Look, I didn't mean to jump into all this too quickly because our listeners have no idea what we're talking about.
No, I'm sorry. Maybe you can edit it. And
it's great. I'm not editing anything. Let's go from here, and maybe we can even backtrack, because I want to know a bit more about your introduction to keto and how you decided to, I guess, change your diet to a keto vegan diet, and then maybe you could even delve into how KetoneAid came about. And I believe your wife's godfather might have had something to do with it.
Yeah. So my wife's godfather is Dr. Richard Veech, and he works at the NIH currently, and he's been working on this, I don't want to say the word synthetic, but a a drink that mimics what your body does naturally after 5 days of fasting. Your body will release what are called ketone bodies or ketones, also known as beta hydroxybutyrate. So he's been working on that for 30, 40 years. And 3 years ago, I had met him before. He came to my wedding, but then I better understood what he was doing. And I had just gone down the rabbit hole with a friend of mine who was doing this ketogenic diet, and it sounded crazy. He was, eating a pound of cheese before going out. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm losing weight. I'm like, oh, what are you, insane? But then, I started doing more research and going down that rabbit hole. So then I was able to actually speak with Dr. Veech and understand it. And normally he's used to having to explain this for 2 hours. So it's pretty frustrating for him to try to start from scratch and explain this concept of eating a high fat diet and releasing something called ketone bodies, which is the second fuel source that the body can use, but no one knows that it exists because there's a McDonald's around every corner. So I started helping him out, and then decided, trying to help him raise some money, but it became very evident that investors, would they buy a super expensive, at that time it was 25, well, we never thought we'd sell it for $25,000 a bottle, but Dave Asprey spent $25,000 for one serving of this drink. But would people buy a $30, $60 drink that tastes nasty? And back then it was revolting, and we'll touch upon, how far it's come now, but back then it was, vomit inducing at one drop of it. Would people buy an expensive drink that tasted like that? So I decided to go, put my money where my mouth is, and I had some successes previously in some .com stuff, and decided to go all in and do this. And we've been growing. It took us a couple of years to figure out how to make it. It's an extremely difficult process. And now we've had our third scale up where you have to buy all new lab equipment from scratch. This isn't something that you just order from China and have it delivered like all the other ketone salts. We make it, and it's difficult to make and still, wildly expensive to make it. It's not like a traditional supplement where there'll be 20x margins on this powder that you buy from China, put it in a nice box and ship it out. But we've had really great success, and people are loving it. And we have a Facebook group where people discuss how to take it. That's where we discover these things like take it before bed, which I was telling people for 1 year, don't take it before bed. That's crazy. It'll keep you up. And then a few people said, hey, we tried it and I had the best sleep ever. I swear to God. And now sleep is actually our number one most reliable way to take it. And I'm almost using that now. If I give it to a celebrity, I tell them to take it for sleep first, because it just works 90% of the time. So then they trust me, and then they'll go and, follow the other protocols. Whereas the sport protocol might only work 50% of the time until you tweak it, and then they give up.
Yeah.
But so this drink, a little bit more about the drink. It mimics what the body naturally does in a ketogenic state or a fasted state, where your body goes into emergency mode and burns your own body fat to create this energy source called ketones. And that is, has an appetite suppression effect. So people that do multi-day fasting, there was a paper from Dr. Cahill in the 60s where they fasted people for 30 or 40 days. The first few days was tough, but after a while, it wasn't that bad, because the ketone levels get so high that your body is just, running off of that fuel source and running off of fat. And people can test in the ketogenic diet, they can test their ketones by doing a blood prick test, kind of like testing for blood glucose, like a diabetic might, and you can see your ketone levels. So on a ketogenic diet, you can throw away the scale and instead just focus on getting your numbers right. So watching what you eat and how much you eat, and trying to get your numbers between 0.5 and 1.2, 1.5. And there's millions of people on Instagram that are having great success with that diet. So this drink mimics that process of burning fat, and that's called ketosis, when you burn fat and have ketones floating through your blood. But there's a misconception, and a lot of people are being told by the competing companies that sell this inferior, weaker product called the ketone salt. They've been around for like 3 or 4 years, where you're drinking this drink and look, you're in ketosis, you're burning fat. And they say it in the same sentence. And that's just not true, or an exaggeration, or a not exactly right statement. When your body is in emergency mode trying to make this fuel, if you drink that fuel, there's no incentive for the body to keep on making it. So you actually temporarily stop endogenous ketosis, which is your body making ketones. It stops that and says, oh, thanks, now I can relax. I just received this drink. And ketones will be higher in your blood after taking the drink, but that doesn't mean that you're in ketosis, that your body's making it, or that you're burning fat. No, you just drank the drink. That's why it's in your blood. And I'm hoping that people that have heard that message 10 times from other people and it just didn't make sense, that they hear this and they go, oh, now that makes sense. Because it's a little bit misleading. How you define ketosis. Some people define it as ketones in your blood, so then that would qualify. But I define it as your body making ketones to be in ketosis. Hopefully that didn't get too technical.
Yeah, actually, Frank, I'm glad you clarified that, because a lot of people would assume that they drink the drink, they measure their blood, and then they're like, well, I'm reading that I'm in ketosis, so I can say I'm now in ketosis.
But people try to use it to get back back on the wagon. I had a cheat day, or I want to eat a cake and then still be in ketosis. I'm like, no. Now, whether there are scientific benefits for that, maybe, but I don't even want to be associated with that remotely, that you can, be more inclined to eat junk because this will somehow be an eraser. And I've actually been on record saying that my wife won't let me advertise this as a weight loss drink until she loses weight on it. And the problem that she has is sometimes if she's doing a ketogenic diet, she can adhere to a diet. It's strict. But then when she has the ester, she kind of gets confused and like, oh, well, maybe I'll have a little bit extra of this or a little bit more carbs because I've got ketones in me. And it just doesn't work that way. So I cringe when people say, I drank the drink to get me back into ketosis, jumpstart me, or even people that are first timers going into a ketogenic diet. I actually just did a video saying, I do not suggest taking the ketone esters. The ketogenic diet for first timers is so tricky and so many devils in the details. And if you mess it up, you get this thing called the keto flu. And my wife was in bed with a heart racing, palpitating heart, headache, and shivering in bed in a fetal position saying, what the hell have you done to me? I don't like being your guinea pig. This biohacking stuff is stupid. And I called some experts and they said she's depleted of salt. And they had me give her like 15 salt pills. Within 15 minutes, she was up and walking around. And I even heard of another woman who was 90 years old. Her doctor told her to go on a ketogenic diet. She missed that 5 steps of a ketogenic diet. She missed the salt part and she had to go to the hospital the next day. And she said it took them a couple of hours to figure out what it was. And I said, oh, I can tell you what it was. She's like, how can you tell me what it was? And the doctor's PhDs, Harvard, couldn't tell me in 2 hours. I said it was lack of salt. She's like, how did you know? They came back and they were scratching their head that it was, low sodium. So your body initially on a ketogenic diet will just lose this is not the drink. This is just the diet. Will lose massive amounts of water weight. So 5 pounds. That's why people like it. It's a quick weight loss, but it's water. It doesn't really count. But with that water goes massive amount of electrolytes. And I'm not talking about shaking a little bit more salt on your broccoli. I'm talking about open up the top of your salt canister and take massive amounts of salt. When I say massive, 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams, maybe not 4 grams, but just a lot of salt. Otherwise, you get the keto flu. So I don't want newcomers into the diet taking the ester, not following all the protocols, getting the keto flu, getting sick, and then suddenly blaming the ester. So I've kind of said, if you've done the ketogenic diet a few times, okay, maybe, but you can do it yourself. You'll be fine. Just follow the right guidelines. You can skip the keto flu. Google how to skip keto flu, and it's great. So I've done a keto vegan diet. My family has been vegan for the last 10 years. My kids are vegan. They're not keto vegan. And people say, oh, what do you eat? I eat less things on the list. And someone says, oh, well, what about the carnivore diet? Well, I'm not here to compete vegan versus a carnivore, but they say that they feel so much better in the carnivore. And I said, it's most likely because carnivore diet doesn't have sugar, doesn't have processed things. So is it so much the benefit of being vegan or being carnivore, or is it just the removal of the stuff that we know that is horrible, processed stuff and high glycemic foods, sugar?
Yeah, Frank, look, you touched on so many important points there. I'd like to just clarify something with you, though. You said that if you take the drink, potentially your body tells itself, well, it doesn't need to be naturally in ketosis because it almost switches off that connection. Similarly, I guess if you take testosterone or something like that, after a while, your body would just switch off. So would that mean then that someone who hasn't experimented with ketosis or isn't in ketosis, they start taking the drink and they take it fairly often, wouldn't that mean then that they probably can't get into ketosis themselves very easily?
Well, let me start with people that are already in ketosis, because they're going to be freaking out. They're going to read that and be, oh, I'm done. I can't take ketones if I'm already in ketosis. I'm going to stop my fat burning. Why would I want to do that? So real quickly, let me touch upon that. So yes, it initially will stop their fat burning because then another energy source just came in. However, if it gives you a appetite suppression for another, that adds an extra 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, or the next meal that you have, you eat half the amount, that process of not eating for several more hours will actually bring you back into ketosis faster. So the net of the entire day for a keto-based person is that they likely will be making more endogenous production, because eating less food is what makes your ketones go up even higher. And there is one scientific paper on metabolism of ketones where they scratched their heads, and the following day, the ketone numbers for these non-keto people were actually higher, and they should have burned off by then. And there's a one-liner in there saying, we think it might signal some endogenous production. So you're fine. It's really hard until we do a lot more scientific studies to prove these things, but don't freak out by the initial stopping. As far as the non-keto athlete, the rest of the world, there's two ways to look at it. One might say, oh, well, only the people who have never experienced ketones are going to have a more profound effect than the people that are already having ketones. We found that that's not the case. The people that are already keto actually are more sensitive to it and actually can take less of it, and it excels their performance more so. So an athlete that goes into a workout normally fasted or chugging a little bit of MCT oil, they're just going into the workout with no fuel. Meanwhile, their carb-based friend is sucking down some Gatorade and some carb drinks, and they're working off of those carbs. To take the ketone ester is, for a keto person, an athlete, is just like a carb person sucking on a gel pack. It's the exact same thing. It's just two different fuel sources, where before you had no fuel source and you're competing against a guy who's not fasted but taking glucose. Now you just have a keto version of glucose, basically. But for the non-keto athletes, sometimes it does. A couple people have reported that it takes them 3 or 4 times for their system to recognize the fuel, but other people have noticed it immediately. And what they notice is, my brain and my body was formerly functioning on glucose, and most people over the age of 30 have some level of glucose impairment in the brain. They don't realize it, but they're functioning at this 88% is this threshold. When you drop below 88% is when you start forgetting things. And there's some papers on this 88% threshold, but you might be at 90, 92, 94, not thinking anything's different. You drink the ester, and for those people, it bypasses this glucose blockage that they didn't even know that they had, and it fuels the brain, and it takes you to 100%. Now, notice I didn't say 105%, 110%. If your brain is already functioning 100%, already getting all the nutrients that it needs, you take the ester, unless you take larger amounts, which I don't suggest taking until you've done it a few times, it doesn't overclock you. So we've given it to people that are super, super healthy, meditate twice a day, brain is just firing perfectly, and they take the ester and they're like, I didn't notice anything. And we give a tiny amount to another person, and within 15 minutes, his brain is just lighting up. So this drink was designed for non-keto athletes, whereas the other drinks, the ketone salts, are so much weaker that, and I'm talking about 1/10 of our serving compared to their full serving. Theirs is so much weaker that they do advocate doing it with a ketogenic diet, because without a ketogenic diet, you're just 8 times out of 10, you're just not going to feel anything. But our drink, it was designed for non-keto athletes. Dr. Veech didn't think that people could do a ketogenic diet. There were a lot less options 10 and 15 years ago. So back then it was just eat a bunch of fat. So it was designed for ketogenic athletes. So there's 2 protocols. Sorry, it was designed for non-ketogenic military use and for non-ketogenic people. So there's 2 protocols for non-ketogenic people, just regular Westerners, Western diet. And one is this microdosing, just taking 5 mLs, 10 mLs. Some larger males might take 15 mLs. You don't want to take too much because the blood sugar drops. But then there's the second protocol where once you go over a certain amount and your blood sugar is dropping too much, you then have to incorporate carbs. So then you do what's called a dual fuel protocol. And this is all on our website. After you order, you get a breakdown of this, and there's message boards of exactly what different people have done, and everyone's different. But you'll take a bolus of glucose first, and then you'll take a bolus of ketones, and then your glucose will spike. You take the ketones, it brings it down to a manageable level. Some people have incorrectly said on podcasts that you have both fuels at a super high level, and that's not sustainable or good. No, it's actually the perfect amount is what you want of both fuels. And then your body is selectively, during the workout, selectively using glucose. So if you're lifting, every time you need that pop of energy, you're using the glucose, but then you're using the ketones on the way down or on the recovery in between sets. So you're using both fuel sources. So that's how it works for Western eaters.
And I guess it really depends on the person, because I'm by no means in ketosis and I don't have a keto diet. Yep. However, I don't feel like when I exercise that I need to take any glucose either.
Okay.
So in my case, I just, like I did.
Well, you might not think that you need it because it's healthier not to do it. But I mean, if you were to take a gel pack, you probably would have a performance increase. You just don't need it. You just don't need that performance increase.
True.
And people that are keto, they're a little bit different because they do need it, because they do feel there's a lot of, I feel so flat when I'm keto. And I'll tell you personally, when I do a CrossFit type workout, I haven't quite figured it out because I get lightheaded. And my instructor's like, is not keto, doesn't understand keto. I do get lightheaded. And I'm trying to figure out with these explosive workouts how to manage that while being keto, because you drop your blood sugar too much. So the keto people have no fuel source and they tend to feel flat, and they've been looking for something, and that's what this is.
Got you. Okay, that's interesting. So maybe we can backtrack a bit. You've touched upon a bit of the difference between the salts that are out there. Sure. But what exactly are ketone salts and ketone esters? How do they differ? And then Sure. Where does KetoneAid come into it?
Yeah, so there's technically 3 types of ketones. One that no one talks about is called acetone. That's like nail polish remover. Don't go drinking nail polish. There's one called acetoacetate, but it's a much weaker form. It's less energy is created per gram of the molecule. And then the main one is beta-hydroxybutyrate, and more specifically D-beta-hydroxybutyrate, and we'll touch upon that. So beta-hydroxybutyrate in and of itself happens to be acidic. It's beta-hydroxybutyric acid, BHB acid. So 10 years ago, when Dr. Veech was making ketones, he made a ketone salt, which means you take this acid, and if you drank it directly, you would burn a hole in your gut. So you add a base, a salt, such as magnesium, potassium, sodium, and calcium, and it brings up the pH, so it's neutral, and you can drink it. But he threw this away in the trash because he said the amount of ATP, the amount of energy that could be created was just so tiny, and all the heart surgeons would kill him because he'd be, scared that the massive sodium overload would have detrimental effects. So he threw it away. So then these companies came around 10 years later and said, wait a second, if we combine it with the ketogenic diet, well, what do you need at the beginning of the ketogenic diet? Massive salt load. What a coincidence. And you combine this beta-hydroxybutyrate with some bases, you can then give it to people that are on a ketogenic diet, and the massive salt load won't be that much of a problem because they need massive salt. So for the last 4 years, there's been these products called ketone salts. Let me talk about one other problem with most ketone salts is the fact that they are what's called racemic. There isn't much information online about this. There is, Dave Asprey did a podcast with Dr. Veech. I made a cameo at the end talking about how I hit 8.0 on my vegan keto diet, and Veech thought that I was crazy or just abnormal. And when something is racemic, it means that your body is only able to use half of it. So you might have seen supplements like L-tryptophan or D-ribose. Sometimes the D is the form that your body uses. Sometimes it's the L form. Well, most of the ketone salts come straight from China. Even if it says made in the USA, it's crazy how they can do this. They ship it over from China. They put it in a bag in the US, and then they put that bag in a new pouch, and then they can say made in the USA because they transferred over that ingredient. It's just ridiculous. And how one can find out, whether something's really made in the USA is very, very tricky. But it's made in China, and it's racemic. It's both the D form and the L form. So if you see on the bottle that it says 10 grams or 11.7 grams of ketone salts or beta hydroxybutyrate, only half of it is bioavailable. So the other half, we don't really know where it goes, much more slowly absorbed, and it doesn't create energy. But it still has double the salt load of a ketone salt that might be non-racemic. So it has even more of a massive, massive salt load problem. The ketone ester is the D form of beta hydroxybutyrate, and instead of combining it with a base or salt, it's combined with something called D, again, 1,3-butanediol. And 1,3-butanediol happens to be this flavoring molecule that coincidentally, when it gets processed in the body, it goes through the liver and it makes ketones. It actually makes more beta hydroxybutyrate. So when you drink this drink, it separates once it gets in the body. The BHB portion, half of it goes directly into the blood, whereas the D1,3-butanediol is kind of like a timed release, and it goes through the liver and makes another round of ketones. So there's no salt. There's actually nothing wrong with adding a little bit of salt, with the ester. It's actually beneficial, and we're working on, doing more of that. But it just has no salt load problem, so you're not limited to the amount that you take. The ketone salts, the salt load is just so massive, you just couldn't take 2, 3, 4. Oh, why don't I just take 5 ketone salts? It just doesn't work, in part because massive salt load actually blocks beta hydroxybutyrate. So the more that you take of these ketone salts, the more that it's blocking the delivery of, the ketones itself. So some people have benefits with it. Some people find benefit only in the first 2 weeks because they're entering into a ketogenic diet. And then they say, oh, it stopped working after 2 weeks. I said, well, what happened? And they said, oh, I couldn't put my rings on. Well, what that means is that the salt is where they were finding the benefit, not the ketones, the salt. And after 2 weeks, after you get through this keto flu period, you don't need the massive salt load. So then now that excess salt leads to water retention and bloating. So I've told people, if you want to save money entering into a ketogenic diet, you could buy the ketone salts, I guess, but just go buy salt. Like, the benefit that you're getting is the salt. If I told you to take 10 to 15 salt pills, you would think I was crazy. But when you actually did the math and compared that to one serving of a ketone salt, it's the same thing. So that's where I think, people use it and it's advertised to, use ketone salts to enter into a ketogenic diet. Yeah, just go buy some salt packets for 75% less, and make sure when I say salt packets that it's got some potassium, sodium, and then nighttime I take magnesium. So that's the 2 main differences. One is ours is not racemic, so it's 100% bioavailable. Your body can use it, but then it doesn't have this massive salt load that restricts the benefit of the ketone. So it's just a night and day. And all the scientific papers, 95% of the scientific papers that are written about ketones are about the ketone ester. And the ketone salt companies will say, hey, look at this new paper. And they'll point to the paper and say, look, ketones work. Oh, yeah, but it's a different molecule. It's just it's not completely different. It's, somewhat related. It's in the umbrella family, but it's just not correct to try to, associate, hey, that ketone ester did this and this and this, so go take this ketone salt. It's just a stretch. And people think that the ester is more expensive, but the problem is it's expensive because you can take 10 to 20 times more. When you buy a roll of Charmin, you can buy a roll of 100 or you can buy a roll of 10,000. It's about, the cost per sheet. It's not about, the total price tag. So many of these products, the ketone salts, the ester is actually less expensive on a cost per effective gram basis. And a lot of people don't know that. They just think, oh, these are just way too expensive. And it's often that they're actually taking it wrong. And there's one podcaster who has, million followers, and she just took way too much. She was taking the equivalent of 70 ml. You took 4 mLs. Okay. She took 70 mLs, and, she would crash. She'd love it for a short period of time, but then crash. And, I emailed her saying, you're just taking way too much. Just because you can, just because the Tour de France, which is how this was, initially tested, just because they might take 2 or 3 bottles and that's $100 a day, doesn't mean that's what you need it for. And this drink was the secret drink that Team Sky has been taking for the last 5 years. And 5 years ago, they said that they had to Google what ketones were because they didn't know what it was. But recently, on a Lance Armstrong podcast, they interviewed a former Team Sky person that was the first person to admit that they've been using it for the last 5 years.
Yeah, I've heard them talk about it. And I remember one story where they dropped the bottle and everyone was freaking out except the writer because he didn't know what was in it.
Oh, so that was an interview I did with Greg Henderson, and he saw a team, he won't say which team, but he saw a team drop a bottle on the side of the road, and he saw that they were freaking out. The entire team was freaking out for 5 miles, and he was like, what's the big deal? Go grab another Gatorade. Then he went back to the bus and telling people about how silly this team was for, freaking out. And they said, oh no, they're drinking this $6,000 a bottle drink. So then he said, oh, now I understand why they were freaking out for 5 miles. And then 2 years later, we gave him the ester, and he was able to clock, and his first time, and this is rare, with larger amounts, a 10% watt difference. And he's like, this is not normal. I know my watts. I've been cycling, Tour de France 6 times. I've been cycling 20 years. To have 10% watts, a 10% watt increase is not placebo. And more impressive than that is he had an Oura Ring type device. The next day, for his heart rate variability monitor to see how recovered he was, it actually recorded as if he had taken the day off. Slight exaggeration.
Yeah, I remember his HRV was really high.
Yeah. And he's like, one thing is 10% higher watts, but if you can do this, normally a hard workout that's normally twice a week, if you can do that 4 times a week, 5 times a week, what does that do, for your system? And a new paper actually just came out using this exact molecule, so not a ketone salt, and they did a 3-week Tour de France simulation where it was just massive, the equivalent of working out super hard every day for 3 weeks. And then they did a time trial, and they blew away the placebo controlled by 15%, like 15% faster in that time trial. And we have one, Instagram, not one, but many, one Instagram guy who Keto Matrix, he actually can work out twice a day now using the ester. And if he doesn't have the ester, he's just at work, he's just brain dead, and he goes back at the last at night to do a second workout, and he's just too zonked. But he actually takes it only after his workout, only for recovery. After the first workout, he takes it, and he's sharp during the day, and then he can go to the second workout of the day without a hitch. So he uses it actually more for recovery. And then I told him to take it for sleep, and he started freaking out after he experienced that.
Interesting. So, I mean, sometimes I think, oh, maybe there's a placebo effect and what have you. But the great example you gave, watts don't lie. You can't increase your watts by 10%.
We did do a trick on a friend. We did do a trick. I'll honestly say that we did give a drink to someone. He said, hey, send me over a placebo, and I'll give it to my friend and see. And I said, how was it? And they were like, my friend loved it. And, it felt great. So maybe there is a part, placebo. They did have a big laugh when he said, hey, I didn't give you ketones. Now here's the ketones. Now go have at it. So yes, there can be a placebo effect, but 10% higher watts. He's like, great, give me a placebo effect every day for the next, Tour de France 7 days. And I'll take a 10% placebo effect gain. Sure.
Absolutely.
Call it whatever you want.
Absolutely. So Frank, you made a really, a good summary of ketone salts, and the comparison between ketone salts and ketone esters. But how do ketone esters vary from company to company? Because I just feel like KE4, your ketone ester, is slightly different to the other ketone esters out there. How so?
Okay, so there's 2 companies that are making what I call a real ketone ester. So that's our company and HVMN. HVMN is a venture capital backed startup in San Francisco. They make a great product. I have a video that kind of biasedly compares the two. And the 2 main differences, the takeaway is that ours is 25% less expensive on a gram per gram basis because they add more water. And secondly, theirs is acidic. So theirs is 3.5 pH, where ours is a neutral 7. So it has less of a burn. So you take either of those 2, it'll be fine. Our protocols are wildly different. They'll probably be changing because they sometimes, move over to what we're doing. Their protocol is open up this bottle, take the entire drink, and that's it. Whereas our protocols are, what kind of diet do you have? How much do you weigh? Are you sensitive? Take this amount. Just a lot more complicated. So their product is great. But there's this other ketone ester that wasn't even on the radar 2 or 3 years ago that is just starting to pop out now. And I knew it was going to happen. And I wish that there was a different phrase. We could call the ketone ester that we have a ketone monoester because of just the way that the molecules are combined. You can call it a monoester. This other ketone ester is called an acetoacetate. So I briefly had mentioned beta-hydroxybutyrate being the main molecule that has energy, but there's this other molecule called acetoacetate. So there's a ketone that's acetoacetate and racemic 1,3-butanediol. So you have half of the molecule is far less energy, maybe 50, 75% far less energy per gram. And then the right side is racemic. So again, only half of it works. And there is some reason to believe that it's actually worse than half because the form that your body can't use is actually blocking some of the effectiveness. So this wildly different thing. And they've used...
Sorry, Frank. Isn't that then more like a ketone salt in that?
No, it's still, so acetoacetate instead of beta-hydroxybutyrate, those are both liquids. Those are both, I don't know if acetoacetate is necessarily acidic, but instead they don't add any base to it. There's no salt added to that molecule. Now they might put it in the entire drink. They might add ketone salts because they know that this ester doesn't do anything, so they might add a little bit of ketone salts. But the molecule itself is acetoacetate bonded to racemic 1,3-butanediol. Ours is D-beta-hydroxybutyrate combined with D-1,3-butanediol non-racemic. So that has been studied on rats and for deep sea diving. It actually might be more beneficial for certain things like deep sea diving and seizures, because one theory is it actually might go the opposite direction in the Krebs cycle. It actually might slow down the body. So if it slows down the body, yeah, great. That can be better for deep sea diving and for seizure control. So that ester, how will you know if it's that ester? They will either say acetoacetate and 1,3-butanediol, but more often than not, they'll actually say nothing. They'll just say nothing so that they can try to ride on the coattails of the actual molecule that works. And there's been one scientific study where they did a cycling study on this other ketone ester. It's technically a ketone ester, and the amount of blood beta-hydroxybutyrate rise when you test your blood ketones, the BHB ketone, the rise in blood ketone was 0.1. Okay, so they took massive quantities of this, and the number was 0.1. And I think also 70% of the athletes got sick, and performance dropped significantly, which is expected to happen when a bunch of people get sick. So wildly different, but you can buy it on China. Go to Alibaba, and you can buy it. It does come I believe it comes in a powder form, even though it's not technically a salt. And you can buy, super cheap, a pound of it, but just night and day, is going to poison the well and confuse people, just is not the same thing. Now, they might mix it with some ketone salts and MCT oil and do what's called fairy dusting, where you just put a tiny amount of this ketone ester, so you can technically say there is a ketone ester in here. We won't tell you how much because that's proprietary, which is just a ridiculous concept. I even say, exactly how much of every single ingredient, for the most part, in our bottle, except for stevia. I don't bother people with that. They won't say what the molecule is, what ketone ester it is, or how much it is, how much quantity is in there. They could just be fairy dusting it, putting it with a ketone salt and MCT oil, and then someone might find some benefit, but it's not the ketone ester.
It sounds like CBD. What all the marketers are doing with the CBD.
Yeah, and I have not gotten into that market at all. I tried some reputable skin cream, and I wanted it to work when I had some injuries. It doesn't seem to work for me, but I have understood that it's now getting confusing because people want to come out with something cheap that's just completely not effective, and it gets hard to understand what's real, what's not.
Well, and how much CBD is in it, as you gave the example with the ketone esters.
Yeah, ours is a 50-50 solution, so it's 50% of the active ingredient and 50% of water and flavoring, and that's the KE4 drink. We will be coming out with other things one's called ketone water. So that microdose that you took, I'm going to put that in a 10, 12 ounce bottle of water. So it'll be much smaller, but it'll be disclosed. Hey, this is 5 grams, 4 grams of ketones, and it won't be buried in this proprietary formula. And one company, what they do is they bury the amount of ketones in their proprietary formula and happen to put a whole bunch of really heavy amino acids in there. They don't need to put 2 to 4 grams of this amino acid, but then it allows them to say, we have 19 grams of this proprietary mix. Well, it only has 8 ketones in it, but they want to market it as saying 19 so that they're bigger than the next company that says that they have 12 ketones. Well, we have 19 keto mix. Like, it's just a lot of tricks out there, and it's tough. I don't envy consumers trying to figure it all out and wade through it. But the HVMN product is great. You'd be fine with that as well.
Excellent. And tell us, who is KE4 for? I mean, obviously athletes, we've discussed that. So I guess let's start with athletes. How can they use it? I don't expect you to go into the measurements because obviously it depends on how much they weigh and all of that sort of thing. And I know your protocol is on your website. But tell us how an athlete would use it day to day. Like maybe even give us an example of an athlete and how they use it.
Sure. So first, the reason it's named KE4, just a quick, because I thought you were going to go down that path. I'm like, oh, no one ever asked me that.
I was waiting for you to tell me, but I think I know.
Oh, okay. What does the 4 stand for?
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me about the 4, but I'm assuming it's, especially the way it's written, it looks like it's written like an element.
Oh, well, so that's the design, but the number 4 actually stands for the 4th macronutrient. So the 4th food group. So there's carbs, fat, protein. And you said at the beginning of the show that you think this is like a quintessentially just night and day difference. This is a 4th food group. It's a new food. It's considered a new food group. So that's where the 4 came from because elite athletes were nicknaming it before it came on the market. Hey, give me some of that 4 stuff. So that's where we came up with ketone ester, and then the number 4. So, but back to, regular athletes. Initially, when we sold the drink, it was so expensive, $30 a bottle, that people would hoard it and save it for their one marathon. And I always say, never take it game day. Always take it a few times in practice and simulate game day. Because we've had professional athletes, drop out of races because they took it the first time on game day and it lowered their blood sugar too much. Didn't work and they had to drop out. So don't do that.
Well, also, I think you mentioned in a couple of other places that I think it takes like 15 minutes for it to really kick in.
Yeah. So you timing, it can take 15 minutes for it to kick in. And some people actually feel like their motor is just going backwards. Like, hey, what's going on here? Like my gears are wrong. And then, once it hits, if they feel it at all, then they say, oh, now it's working. But so we initially sold it as this, expensive drink that you would use. Some people would only be able to afford it once, a big event. But then the feedback that we got from people was, hey, Frank, I'm taking 1/10 of a bottle. And I swear I had a better workout than when I took the full bottle. And we found and discovered that just even tiny amounts, people are finding benefit. So we're talking for women, 5 mLs before a workout, 10 minutes before a workout, or up to 15 mLs for males. And this is without the dual protocol. And they can take that every single day. So that's, the general sports protocol is starting super low like that. You can take it every single day before your workout. Some people prefer to take it after their workout, more for recovery. I'm about to go to work, so I want to bring my brain back and be less zonked, and for the recovery benefits, you can use it like that.
And Frank, do some athletes take it before and after, or would you not recommend that?
That's when it can start getting expensive. If you're taking it, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, you take it before your workout, you take it after your workout, and then small amounts during the day, just like a food. It's like, well, when do I take fat? When do I take carbs? Well, you're just taking it throughout the day. So yeah, you can take it, multiple times for different needs. But then, yeah, it'll start getting expensive if you're taking $5 worth 3 times a day. I mean, that's $15.
Are there any, apart from on your wallet, are there any other ramifications in terms of overdosing? I mean, overdosing in microdosing, I would say. Yeah. And then also, not only that, but do you start getting used to it and therefore you need more?
Well, that's a very funny question. And I had someone that was taking it for 2 months, stop using it. And I'll discuss why I think that happened. So the FDA GRAS, generally recognized as safe document, says that you can take up to 75 grams a day of the active ingredient. So ours is 1-to-1 water. So that's 150 mLs. So that's about 2.5 of our small servings. So that's $75 worth a day. And you took $2 worth here, $1 worth before bed. So there's a long runway.
I'm a cheap date, Frank.
What's that?
I'm a cheap date.
Oh, yeah. So the downsides of taking too much. So the downsides are, if you take too much, it will drop your blood sugar too much. That's the main downside. So if I see someone yawning or even walking toward a cupboard, I gave it to my brother-in-law at the beach because he had his back muscles were hurting, and his back muscles, 30 minutes later, he was able to be more flexible and he didn't have the pain, but I saw him walk over to the cupboard. I said, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I don't know, I think I'm going to grab something." I said, "You took too much." So then just even thinking about food means that his blood sugar dropped too much. The next day we went from 10 mLs to 5 mLs, and he had the same sensation in his legs, but he didn't walk to the cupboard. So when you drop your blood sugar too much, it can actually make you more hungry. Some people, it can make them sleepy. If there's too much of an energy spike, just like if you took a bolus of glucose, too much glucose, you're going to have an energy spike, and then your body can have an insulin-like response. We don't know what it is. We don't know. It's not insulin, but something like insulin that can kind of be telling the body, hey, too much energy, let's shut you down. So if you took, the entire bottle 10, 15 times more than you thought, it can do these things. But some people that are super sensitive, I've even had women at 10 mLs pre-workout say that they felt kind of flat and, didn't think that it was great. And I cut them in half down to 5 mLs, so $2 worth. And they said that it was a marked improvement for them. So that's what you're looking for, is just feeling more flat and low glycemic, low blood sugar.
Okay. And so that's the athlete. So potentially before or after a workout, depending on really, I guess, their goals, if they need help to get through the workout or if they need help afterwards.
And the night before, the night before a big race or sleeping. An athlete, deep sleep is where you get, my understanding is the recovery of their muscles, like a lot of recovery. And some people even hack their deep sleep, and they do this crazy thing where they wake up every 3 hours, or they wake up so that the deep sleep can be reset just to get more deep sleep. So we have a lot of athletes will take it before game day as well, so that they wake up just much more refreshed. So they can actually, so they can take it 3 times, 3 different ways. So then the next group is CEOs that can afford it because they can take a little bit more just for the brain throughout the day, taking small amounts. And on Instagram, King Keto, unpaid, he took it for an entire month, and he thought it was kind of good. It was as if every day was an above average good day that would normally have been in his spectrum of 1 day a month. He just happened to be having that every day. He stopped taking the ester, didn't think anything of it. I pinged him, hey, have you stopped taking it? Yeah. And then he noted that he went back and looked at his sales numbers, and his numbers, I don't know the percent, I need to find the percent, were just drastically higher than his December and February numbers. And he said, man, that was the esters. And I said, I bet you I know what happened is you just thought it was you. You just thought it just felt normal, felt good. You just, slightly better mood. He's like, that's exactly what it was. I just felt like, hey, this is me. This is normal. But only when he looks back at his data, at the numbers, does he say, wait a second, like those numbers aren't normal. And we did have someone taking it for 2 to 3 months. And I think what happened is that 88% threshold that I was talking about, he would take the ester, and it does have a cumulative effect where if you were hovering around 85, you jump to 88, there's the biggest profound difference there. But then there's a less of a difference as you head, because your body needs that 88% threshold, less and less noticeable as you get closer to 100%. So it is possible that it's not that it stops working, it's just that it's been cumulatively working. So then you're back to normal, and you're just like, hey, I'm not noticing as big of a difference because your baseline is just higher. And then only if you would stop taking it, maybe for even a week or two, would you then possibly start noticing that your body's going back to this, 88%, 85% of your brain being fueled by glucose. So no, it doesn't stop working. It actually has a cumulative benefit onto it, but it is possible that you will be less likely to notice it if your overall improvement is going back up to your regular baseline. And there's been a paper on this just for longevity purpose. Like some experts say this should just be taken for longevity. And the Dr. Veech paper talked about how there were 5 studies on caloric restriction, each with a theory of why the animals lived longer. And basically the conclusion was, it's the ketones, stupid. And here's why. And he goes into way above my head, scientific explanation of how the ketones work, and the telomeres, which is a typical indication of longevity. These telomeres lived longer or grew longer as opposed to shortening. So on a daily basis, it's probably far more effective than all those ads that you've seen for that NAD thing. That just doesn't do anything. So yeah, it can be taken, every day, multiple times a day. My favorite way of taking it is before bed and pre-workout. Those are my two go-tos.
Great. No, that's excellent. And I'm really glad that you sort of did this and got in touch with Dr. Veech and made this come about, because I remember it must have been 2.5 years ago, I listened to a podcast and he was being interviewed, and he was basically telling us why ketone salts just were a joke and how they were making a lot of money for no reason.
Yeah.
And
he said he wouldn't touch them with a 10 or 15-foot pole.
I remember
that was racemic. That was the racemic.
I really remember that interview, and I thought to myself at that time, well, come out with something that works then. And so thank you for making that happen. So, Frank,
not been easy.
I can imagine. So you've been so informative today, and thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Oh, don't mix it with MCT oil. MCT oil is a type of super strong coconut oil, specifically one called C8. Don't mix it with that, because they both compete with the same pathway, is one theory, that they both go through the liver. So one blocks the other, and people can get GI problems. Ketone salts with MCT oil is fine. And that other ketone ester that's a powder might work with the oil, but keep this ketone ester, the D-beta hydroxybutyrate D1,3-butadiene, does not work well with MCT oil. But I have all these 5-10 minute short videos on my YouTube channel that talks about don't take with this. And if you're doing 1 day intermittent fasting where you're eating once a day, the best protocol is to take a small amount first thing in the morning, and it helps you get to your dinner. But if you're doing a multi-day fast, you don't want to take a bolus. you don't want to take a large amount. You want to take much smaller amounts, maybe 5 times a day, because you don't want to get that spike. If your blood ketones after multi-day fasting are already at 3.0, 4.0, you don't want to take a big amount of the drink and jump to 8, 9.0. You might fall asleep. So instead, you'll take 2 mLs to 5 mLs several times a day. And I did a video where I did my own experiment with a 30-hour fast, and I just sipped on it 4 or 5 times throughout the day and didn't really think about food.
Excellent. Well, we'll link to your YouTube channel as well as ketoneaid.com/protocol, because on there you talk about the MCT and everything else and how to do it. So, yeah, absolutely. And is there any sort of discount or anything you can give our listeners?
Yeah, so I did set it up. So if they type in discount code Ali Fitness, so you buy it directly from ketoneaid.com/Ali Fitness, or you can use the coupon code Ali Fitness, and that knocks off shipping. So I know it's not much. I know there's a lot of other things out there that are 40% off this and that, but the ketone esters, we're still losing money right now. Not like the ketone salts that literally they buy them from China for 10 cents and sell them for $1 or $2. But it'll save you $15.
Perfect.
And, help a little bit.
Awesome. And Frank, just before I let you go, I've got to ask you a bit of a personal question.
Sure.
Do you have a tattoo?
I do not have a tattoo. My wife has 4, and she wants me to get my first, possibly next weekend at the beach.
No way. What does she want?
She wants a small wave, I think is what she wants.
Cool. Does it matter?
And don't ask me why. Don't ask me why, because I'll get in trouble, because I probably should know. And there's a real significant reason for it. I just don't remember.
So next time we see you, you'll have one then.
Well, I'll guarantee if you get video, if you do video podcasts, I will at least have a temporary tattoo on for you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, Frank.
All right. Thank you very much.
For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ali.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.